Hello there everyone, and welcome back to Void Dwarf Studios for another lore episode on the Seraphon. Now, we have looked at the big bloated toads, we have looked at their little teeny lizardy minions. Now we need to look at the brutal military intellects that, well, intellects, that's possibly a generous word. They're brutal generals who will lead their armies in battle. The Saurus, or Cirrus, or however you wish to pronounce it, Warriors of the Seraphon. These absolutely awesomely cool, beautiful dinosaurs of death. It is without a doubt the Saurus Warriors, which I'm going to try and remember to call them this, although I occasionally do switch to Saurus or Saurus. I don't know, I just like both. Anyway, the Saurus Warriors are without a doubt the creatures that allow the Seraphon to not only, well, last in the old world, but also in Age of Sigmar, because, quite frankly, as helpful as the skinks are, when it comes to brute strength, military prowess, and that certain degree of bloodlust savagery that is occasionally required, especially when you're dealing with, well, literal demons, Saurus Warriors fit the bill perfectly, because not only is it a massive, hulking lizard with really thick scales hard enough to deflect sword blows, these things easily stand the same height as an orc, and are almost as muscular, but with far thicker scaly hide. A really bad sense of humour, it's also got massive teeth, and, you know, if it feels that a bite will dispose of the enemy just as quick as a star mace club to the head, then, yeah, they'll just drop its weapons and start tearing its foe limb from limb. This is a creature where subtlety really isn't, that relevant. That's what skinks are for. At the end of the day. Exactly like their skink brethren, Saurus Warriors are birthed from the spawning pools as adults, and they will more or less go straight away into doing whatever function it is they're required. The younger Saurus Warriors tend to be a little bit more on the animalistic side, but as the years go by, the aggressive tendencies, whilst never leaving, are tempered with a certain degree of cold intellect that these dinosaur reptiles have. And I've mentioned a couple times in previous videos that the Sauruses are almost like automatons, or robots, or not very intelligent. And it's true, they're not particularly intelligent. If you gave a Saurus a book, it would eat it, or club you over the head with it, more likely. However, Saurus Warriors picked out to be leadership don't really need to be intellectual. They just have to understand military concepts like flanking, counter-charges, surprise attacks, raids and ambushes, you know, all the kinds of stuff that a military commander should get under their heel and understand. And in this, Saurus Warriors are very, very, very quick at adapting, learning, and being really good at, frankly, just being terrifying and aggressive. Now, depending upon your slan, really affects the kind of Saurus Warrior you're going to encounter. You might encounter a Saurus Warrior who was, as I said, birthed from a spawning pool, in which case it is a flesh and blood creature much more than its counterparts, the Star Masters, who tend to float around in space, as opposed to the ones that have made their homes in the realms. The difference is that one Saurus Warrior is created pretty much purely out of the slan's imagination, and whilst it has a physical form, it's also kinda not there. It's almost like a ghost, except it can punch you back and bite your head off at the same time. And depending upon the slan Star Master, very much dictates the temperament and coloration of the Saurus Warrior themselves. But we are talking about the leadership for the Saurus Warriors. So, let us start with the first tier on our ladder. This is our Saurus Warrior who, birthing pool or imagination, regardless, has earned their stripes. They have, you know, bitten the heads off of so many Chaos Worshippers, or really bludgeoned to death so many demons, and they have been recognised for this and become what is known as a Saurus Scar Veteran. When a Saurus Warrior is a flesh and blood kind, typically this is represented by some new bloody scars on them. Which, you know, it's a very simplistic way of giving you some epaulets, but, you know, it works. These particular Sauruses continue to fight in an almost berserk reckless abandon, using their strength, to bludgeon their way through anything that might be coming for the Old Bloods, the next stage up. In fact, this bloody mentality means that they love riding similar-sized dinosaurs as themselves, typically on a Carnosaur, or leading a unit of Cold Ones as a Saurus Knight. Cold Ones being large reptilian dinosaurs, and Carnosaurs being the equivalent of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Possibly one of my favourite miniatures that ever came out of Games Workshop, because it's a goddamn dinosaur. What's not to love? After this, as I said, you will have your Old Blood. The Old Bloods tend to be the leaders of the Seraphon Cohorts, that is, the armies that go out from their particular temple cities. They will be covered in scars, their muscles will be absolutely straining at the leash, and their hide will be so thick that sometimes it really takes a magical weapon or something ridiculously heavy to even pierce it. Old Bloods are potentially generals and veterans of thousands of battles. They are peerless warriors and understand military tactics far more than any other Saurus, and are easily capable of outsmarting most of the other races. Their strength of will and alpha Saurus-like energy essentially means that they can command their units almost instinctively. The other Sauruses looking to the Old Blood for what to do next, and instinctively following in their direction. And much like the Scar veteran, the Old Blood does love riding around on a Carnosaur, and I really don't blame him, because Carnosaurs are freaking awesome and I absolutely love them. And why have I not picked up a Seraphon army yet? I don't know. I think it's because I have far too many projects as it is, quite frankly. But hey, the Old Bloods are your generals. These are the not geniuses, quote-unquote, in an intellectual sense, but master strategists over tried and tested time periods. They will have learned over and over again, partly through experience, but partly through the fact that each spawning is unique. Information on how best to wage war almost programmed into them. And whilst they do have a personality of a sort, they are capable of making independent decisions, they are still utterly loyal to their Slan masters, and wouldn't even give 1 minute thought if a Slan asked them to kill themselves for no real reason. This is the loyalty that the Slan Star Masters command from these creatures. And finally, you have a unique variant on the Old Blood, known as a Sunblood. These variations on the Saurus Warrior are those who actually follow an interesting path. These are Sauruses who have been saturated with the power of Azir, becoming almost pure manifestations of the realm of heaven. They are stronger physically than even the most scarred Old Bloods, and they will happily wade through any enemy rank and smash them to pieces with their heavy shields, large weapons, and terrifying teeth. They are so strong that they are capable of tearing an orc's head off with their bare hands. It can take long centuries of warfare and battle for them to truly come out as heroes, and many of them existed back in the Age of Myth. And because of this long lifespan that Sauruses have, it's been theorised that the Sunbloods are in fact the earliest form of, well, physical Seraphon. It is of course entirely possible that these Saurus Warriors are some of the original descendants from the world that was. It is entirely possible the Sunbloods are the mortal descendants from those who fled the world that was, and it would reflect how battle-scarred they are that, well, they have been alive for, at this point, thousands of years, which is more than enough, I would say, to be saturated in heavenly magic, because why the heck not? As we have ended our little lore section of this video on the Sunblood, let's start with our Sunblood friend. The Sunblood is, as mentioned, a hulking champion of the Seraphon. It is used essentially as a line breaker, but it is a commander in its own right, and it is capable of leading forces in battle. With a very respectable 7 wounds, 3-inch move, a 3+ save, which is ridiculously cool because not many armies have a decent save, and a Sunblood has a nice chunky 3+, and a bravery of 8, which means it's not going to go anywhere very fast. Its single ability is Primary Rage, meaning as this individual has been around for some time and seen more than enough stuff to get it thoroughly pissed off, it kind of gets a bit upset. On an unmodified hit roll of a 6, this model scores 2 hits instead of 1. In addition, if the unmodified wound roll for an attack is a 6, it inflicts a mortal wound on top of what you already did. Which is, goodness gracious gravy, when you consider the fact that this thing has 7 attacks in total, yes, 7 attacks, that's terrifying. And those 6s explode into extra hits, and potentially even more mortal wounds. That's all kinds of crazy. And its command ability Center Weakness means that once it's found something that it decides is the weak link in an enemy's army, it will ferociously attack it. You pick an enemy unit within 12 inches during your combat phase. Until the end of that phase, you add 1 to wound rolls for attacks made by friendly Saurus Warriors who are within 12 inches of this model. Yeah. So, this Saurus Sunblood basically slams into something, unfortunate enough to be deemed the weak link in the chain, and all the Saurus buddies within 12 inches of it basically get a pound on it by adding 1 to their wound rolls. And when you consider the fact that this absolute beast of a Saurus has 6 attacks with its Celestine War Mace, hitting and wounding on a 3 and a -1 rend, 1 damage, but because you have the potential to explode your wound rolls and hit rolls, that's a ridiculous amount of damage output. This thing is amazing at killing units, particularly ranked ones. And because it's a Saurus Warrior, you always get your fearsome Jaw Bite, hitting on a 4 and wounding on a 3 with 1 damage. This is a lovely, lovely, lovely little leader, and is more than capable of dishing out the dirt. Maybe not place him up against something like a particularly buff combat hero, because he might struggle just because he doesn't have a lot of rend or damage, but because he has so many attacks, it's entirely possible he might just, well, butcher him because of how tough he is. Starting off with your lovely Scar Veteran's Cold One buddy, you have a very different stat profile from your Sunblood. 7 wounds, an 8-inch move, 4+ armor save, and 8 bravery, which is very respectable considering this is the first tier on our ladder. The Saurus Scar Veteran has cold ferocity, meaning that every time he hits something on a 6, it scores 2 hits. Because, yeah, Saurus Warriors have the cold ferocity rule, which is all kinds of fun. And his command ability, Saurian Savagery, means that he basically is fantastic. It just makes him all that extra killy. You pick a friendly Saurus unit within 18 inches that is wholly within 18 inches of this unit. Until the end of that phase, if the unmodified hit roll for an attack made with a melee weapon is a 6, it scores 2 hits. So yeah, that's all kinds of fun. Slam into a unit with this guy leading a bunch of Cold One Knights, and watch limbs just fly left, right and centre. With a very, very respectable 3 attacks with the Celestine War Pick that, again, hit and wound on 3s, -1 rend, 1 damage, fearsome Jaw Bite for the funsies, same as the Sunblood, and the snapping jaws of your Cold One Dinosaur, 2 attacks that hit on 3s and wound on 4s with that 1 damage. And remember, if your Sunblood is nearby, then, well, that's wounding on 3s instead of wounding on 4s. That's quite a fun little opportunity right there. This thing is, well, it's your speedy general. You use him to get into fights relatively quickly, for a Saurus, and yeah, munch away and have tons of fun in the process. Of course, the 4+ save means that he's going to suffer a little bit more if he is in a grindy situation, but hopefully you will charge him with some buddies and not by himself. And if you decided that a Cold One simply won't do, and you really want to just embrace your inner child and go Scar Veteran on a Carnosaur, then who am I to judge? These things are absolutely hilarious. 12 wounds, 8 bravery, 4+ save, and when unwounded it has a wonderful 10-inch move. You have multiple weapon options, which just make things all kinds of funny. Starting off with your weapon of choice, you can take either a Celestine Warblade, which is 6 attacks that hit and wound on 3s and 1 damage. You have a Celestine War Spear, which is the same stat again, but you have an extra inch of range. So, potential to hit more models, always good. And finally, you have the Celestine Great Blade. Halved your attacks to 3, you're only hitting on 4s, but you do get the +3 to wound, a -1 rend, and a flat 2 damage, which ain't half bad. Your Carnosaur has 2 attacks that hit on 3s when unwounded, and wound on 3s with 2 damage flat, and your Jaws, by far the most hilarious thing about this dinosaur, 3 attacks, hitting on 4s, wounding on 3s, -1, and a max of 5 damage when unwounded. Yeah, 5 damage. That is potentially enough to just outright kill some smaller heroes. This thing is an absolute, well, dinosaur. Tish. And there are plenty of abilities to go with your various weapons. For example, Celestine Spear means that if you chose this as your weapon, you add 1 to the damage characteristic if you charged. So suddenly you're doing 2 damage with a Celestine Spear, making it definitely one of the better options just because of that extra damage output without suffering fewer attacks. Blood Frenzy means that the Carnosaur is a little bit blood hungry, and once it's killed something, for the rest of the game, it can run and charge in the same turn, just because it's just that eager to get into close combat, and it's just so frickin' excited about it all. Cold Ferocity, again, meaning that if you hit on a 6, it explodes into 2 hits, which is all kinds of insane, considering this thing can potentially be pumping out a whopping 11 attacks. I mean, good gracious gravy, 11 attacks that on 6s pop into 2 hits is just all kinds of insanity in my opinion. And Pinned Down means that the Carnosaur has a fond habit of picking things up in its clawed limbs and just tearing them off with its jaws. And this is represented by adding 1 to hit for your attacks made with your jaws if the target has 7 or less wounds. Basically meaning most hero characters that don't have a mount, and some characters that do. Yeah, suddenly those jaws went from really dangerous, because hitting on 4s means you have a chance maybe of living, to oh dear god please help me. Because you're then hitting and wounding on 3s, -1 damage, -1 rend and 5 damage. Just good gracious gravy god, that's terrifying. And he has the same command ability, Saurian Savagery, so you can potentially have a Saurus unit that charges in nearby. I would personally say Cold One Knights, because it's just dinosaurs all charging together on mounts, dinosaurs riding dinosaurs, and, well, exploding 6s into more attacks, because why the hell not? It's awesome. And finally, we have our Saurus Old Blood, the true great commanders of the Seraphon race, and the ones who direct their cohort through instinctive precision and on the general understanding of the Slan's instructions, usually passed on by the skinks who have a general idea of the Slan's instructions. Saurus Old Bloods have 7 wounds, a 5-inch move, that wonderful 3+ save, and 8 bravery. Because these guys have been around for a ridiculous time too, not quite as much as a Sunblood, but still highly respectable. With multiple choices, including the Celestine Maul, which are 3 attacks that hit on 4s, wound on 3s with a -1 rend and D3 damage, the Warblade, which is 5 attacks that hit on 3s, wound on 3s, and a single damage a pop, the War Spear, which is a 2-inch range weapon, with 4 attacks that hit and wound on 3s, 1 damage, and finally the Celestine Great Blade, which is 3 attacks that hit on 4s, wound on 3s, -1 and 2 damage. And of course, because of Saurus, he gets his fearsome Jaws attack, much like the other ones. Cold Ferocity is exactly the same as our other Saurian heroes, meaning that if he hits on a 6, he scores 2 hits instead of the 1. No exploding mortal wounds, which is odd, but it's still very handy. Wrath of the Seraphon is reflecting the fact that this guy is a general, and he knows exactly how to get you in the best possible position to do extra killing. During the combat phase, you pick a friendly Saurus unit within 18 inches of the Old Blood. Until the end of that phase, you can add 1 to hit rolls for attacks made by that unit. So let's get this straight, people. You can have, if you have a Saurus Old Blood, a Saurus Sunblood, and you have the Scar Veteran, all these command abilities cycling around. +1 hits, +1 wounds, Yeah, it's all kinds of fun. And let us not forget the fact that your Saurus Old Blood can be on a Carnosaur. Because, dear God, why wouldn't you? Quite frankly. Because the Saurus Old Blood gets a cool little toy when he's on a Carnosaur, called the Sunbolt Gauntlet. This is based on a character in Warhammer Fantasy known as Kroq-Gar, who is unfortunately not around in Age of Sigmar, although perhaps he'll make a return in some other form. But basically, a piece of Old One technology has been used by the Old Bloods as a new kind of weapon, because it's hilarious. It's a laser beam shooting gauntlet. Because why not? 18-inch range, D6 attacks, hitting on 3s, wounding on 4s, -1 rend, 1 damage. That's not too bad at all. And you get the Sunstone Spear. 3 attacks that hit and wound on 3s, -1 rend, 3 damage. You have the clawed limbs and massive jaws, exactly the same as your Scar Veteran, meaning that yes, that wonderful 5 damage is still nicely nestled within your Carnosaur's jaws. The Blazing Sunbolt means that you add 1 to wound rolls for attacks made with the Sunbolt Gauntlet against Chaos Demons, because that is exactly what this technology is designed to really hurt. In addition to Cold Ferocity, Pin Down and Blood Frenzy, you have Terror, which means you subtract 1 from the Bravery characteristic of enemy units within 3. And you still have your Wrath of the Seraphon ability, which works exactly the same as the Old Blood on foot. Have a nice mix of these characters because you can thoroughly take advantage of all the wonderful, wonderful little abilities they have, and who doesn't love extra pluses to hit and wound? That's always hilarious, but for God's sakes, with 12 wounds, 10-inch movement, 4+ save and 8 bravery, make sure you don't let this guy go around by himself. By far the biggest mistake you can make, even in this new edition that does promote your heroes over your troops, don't let them go off alone where people can just gang up on them and, well, pound them into the dirt. Even a Carnosaur in the world of Age of Sigmar can only take so much punishment. And that is the leadership of the Saurus Warriors. I hope you've enjoyed this little episode. Please like and subscribe, check out the Patreon page, and I hope to hear from you all soon. Until next time, take care everyone.